Some of you may know that I'm a carver, so I thought I'd show how coarse, medium, and fine applies to carving. So how does it apply? You walk up to one of these beautiful carvings, let's say in a cathedral in London, and you look at that and you just go, where did they start? How did they make that? Did they just sit down at the bench and start hacking at it with a gouge? Yes, but in a much more orderly way. And to my mind, that order and the thing that provides that order is the concept of coarse, medium, and fine. Carving in relief is all about taking something from a coarse step to a medium step to a fine step. The example we're going to look at today is we're going to be carving a leaf. A leaf is something that you want to appear alive, and that's really the main goal when you're trying to carve something like foliage. So we'll start with just a block of wood. This is alder. It doesn't look like a leaf now, but when we take the coarse step of drawing on a leaf pattern and then sawing out that pattern with a jigsaw or with a coping saw, well, now all of a sudden it's starting to look more like a leaf. I mean, we've gone a long way in just that one coarse step. We now have sort of the outline of a leaf, which is good for if we're looking at it straight on like this, but we want to add even more life to it. So we're going to use coarse, medium, and fine now to get from this stage to where the surface of the leaf is realistic and has some life to it. Working in 3 dimensions here, but we sort of only work on 1 dimension at a time. We've cut out our shape in these 2 dimensions, and now we're going to add some life by adding some shape in this 3rd dimension of depth. And this is the marked by the line that I've drawn on here. We're going to have the leaf sort of curl up here at the end a little bit, and then flatten out, and then sort of come up nearly to our surface on this side. So I know what I want now. I'm able to draw my pattern or what I want on the wood. Now I just have to realize it with tools. This piece of wood is a little bit too small to use a coarse tool like an axe. Although if I'm carving a big piece, I could use an axe to do the coarse work. In this case, I'm going to use a coping saw, and we're just gonna go from the side here, and we're going to saw out this shape with a coping saw. So I'm just going to start out, I'm going to go on the waist side of that line with my coping saw, give a little scoop to it. Just all I'm doing is basically cutting to the line and exiting the wood, and there we go. So in one step we've gone from a flat surface on this leaf to a surface that's starting to have some nice curl and some nice life to it. It still looks pretty coarse though, and it really doesn't have a lot of the detail that a real leaf does. So we need to go to the next step, we'll go to the medium step to refine the shape. We're going to switch over from a saw to a set of gouges. Gouges come in different widths and different sweeps, or amounts of curvature to them. The coarse gouges tend to be the ones with the largest sweep and also the largest width. This is sort of a medium sweep. It's a number 5 gouge. And fairly narrow width, but we have a fairly narrow piece we're working on. So my first step is going to be to sort of refine the shape that I've cut with the saw with this gouge. And I'll be just trying to get some of the roughness and some of the lines that are left behind by the saw cuts off. So I've got sort of a faired continuous surface, but really sort of maintaining most of the shape. I'm really, with each gouge cut, I'm not really removing that much material like I did with the coarse step. I'm just trying to refine what I did with the coarse step. Now since my grain is going in this direction and I need to go down, if I go this way with the gouge, I'm going to split it right off. So I need to turn around and come from the other direction to do the tip of my leaf. Now back the other way to get some of that coarse material off. Switching hands is always useful. Okay, but now I come to a little bit of a problem. This is what's known in carving as the bottom of the bowl problem. We've been making cuts primarily with the grain, or at least across the grain, sort sort of going down this way, and we've made some downward cuts still in the direction of the grain that way, but that leaves kind of a ragged surface along the bottom. So we're going to switch tools, and we're going to use, this is a number 7 gouge. It's a little bit more swept to match the curvature of the bottom of that course, or the bottom of that leaf or bowl. And we're just going to go across the grain there to clean some of that up. So now we have a nice carved surface, but because the gouge has a fair amount of sweep to it, we have left over here a lot of tool marks. And you know, some tool marks are nice in carving because it's a handwork kind of occupation, and you want your work to look hand carved. But we can now go to the next step from this sort of medium step with a medium gouge to more of a fine step, more of a surfacing step, using a less swept gouge. So we went from a number 5 gouge sweep to a number 3 gouge sweep. And I'm just going to use this number 3 gouge again here to work on my surface. And I'm not really changing the shape here so much as I'm just removing some of the tool marks left with the medium step. And I may have to go back and clean up that bottom of the bowl issue again by going across the grain. In this case I'm doing a fine operation. I'm doing a surfacing operation, but I have to use a swept gouge to match the curvature of the carving. So now I'm looking more like a leaf, but it's not quite as lively as I'd like. I'd like each sort of part of the leaf to be, maybe have some little indentations, that the way leaves would start to curl up as they dry and have these little concave and convex sections on them. So I'm going to use a fairly high swept gouge, a number 7, and I'm going to carve into these parts of the leaf some little indentations just to give it some life. Because I'm using this tool to really create a surface here, it's still considered a fine operation, even though I'm using a gouge which has a high sweep and can also be used for coarse operations or more coarse operations. And maybe right here on this one, just got a little tear right there. Go the other direction. So I want to make my little sweep right at the end of that tip of that leaf. Now we've done some refinement of the surface. We've got some nice life going on there, but it's still a little flat. It doesn't quite have as much life as a real leaf would. So now we go to an even more fine step. We're going to be adding detail at the level of the veins of the leaf. And to do that, we're going to be using what's called a veiner. This is a number 11 2mm veiner, and its job in life is to make very fine little cuts that give you a little precise detail that adds some life to your carving. So I'm just going to draw in a vein on the leaf. Using a nice curve here gives it some extra life and shape. This is the main vein of the leaf. Get those two cuts to meet up at the bottom as best I can. And there's our main vein. Maybe we'll give one of these sides a little more of a vein to it at the bottom, like that. And finally, we use an even finer veiner. This would probably be about a 1mm number 11 to add some more detailed veins to give the leaf some life. So still a bit rough, but you see in a relatively short period of time we've taken a pretty inanimate block of wood and we've gone from a coarser to a finer set of steps in detail to get down to adding enough life to this leaf so it's starting to look lifelike. This last demo, I'm going to teach you how to add some class to your saw cuts. This applies mainly to cutting with hand saws. I guess I'd start this out by asking a question. In furniture, are all the faces of the pieces that are going to come together to build the furniture, are all of those pieces show faces? Do all of those pieces need to be perfectly square, perfectly flat, perfectly smooth, or perfectly nice looking? And you think about it and you say, no, of course not. There are definitely some places where you have joinery coming together where you need all the accuracy and precision you can get. There are places that are going to be displayed prominently within the piece where the looks of the saw cut might be important, such as the shoulder of a tenon. And there are some places where, especially in the construction of the piece, you just need to get a saw cut that's kind of close to where it's going to be, but you're going to make a final saw cut past that anyways. So we're looking at saw cuts then in terms of sort of a coarse, medium, and fine. That is, we're going to start out with a third class saw cut where neither accuracy nor looks is important. We're going to go to a second class saw cut where now accuracy is important, but we don't have to have the cut turn out to look, it doesn't have to look that great. It's going to be hidden, as in the inside of a tenon, which is going to go inside of a mortise. No one will ever see it. Finally, we're going to be doing a tenon shoulder where we want the tenon shoulder to be perfectly straight and perfectly, very little tear out and very nice looking. The third class saw cut. I have my piece of wood here I've marked out with the 3 cuts we're going to make in turn. Third class saw cut, just need to cut it to rough length, which is about 1.5 inches past the end. Take my trusty crosscut saw, put my thumb up next to it to give it approximately where I want it to go. Okay, no great mystery. Third class saw cut. Accuracy wasn't particularly important, but all I needed to do was shorten the work. Second class saw cut. The next goal is to try to make an accurate cut. I need to cut this to a very accurate length. So I've marked here on the surface of the wood, I've marked where I want that to go. I'm going to team up the talents of my marking knife and my saw to achieve length accuracy. So first what I'll do is, in order to give the saw a surface to reference off of, I'm going to make a cut with my marking knife. It's going to be a kind of a wedge cut. I take my marking knife, I put it on the line, I press in, maybe about 2-3 millimeters, and then make a wedging cut next to it. Now what that's going to do, when I put my saw in there, is the wedge is going to, and gravity and the force of my arm is going to push the bottom of the saw toward the shoulder that I've just made there, giving the saw some purchase and a place to reference from. So I've now made my reference mark. It's exactly on the line. I bring my saw in and I make a cut to that shoulder. I then drop the back half of my saw, bringing it along the line that I've drawn. And proceed. Second class saw cut. If I was really needing to get it not just lengthwise but also square up and down here, I would have also made a mark along the side here like this, and then with my saw I would have followed that line down so that I have 2 perpendicular lines defining a plane in which my saw is going to cut. Now we'll move on to the third class saw cut. For the third class saw cut, we need to bring in the talents of our chisel. In the third class saw cut, we care about both accuracy and looks. So we're going to make the surface or the show face of this cut Imagine that this is the shoulder of a tenon, as I've marked here. We're going to make that cut actually with some blades. We're going to use our marking knife blade, and we're going to use our chisel blade. I take a square. I'll make a notch just as I did in the second class saw cut to get our accuracy. That will start the cut. I place my knife in that cut against the shoulder that I've just cut on the line. Now I'm going to bring my square over to that point where now my knife is touching, and bring the knife across the work and draw or cut a nice deep line. Now, to give me a very nice edge here that the saw can't provide, I'm going to use a relatively wide chisel. It's a 1-inch chisel, and I'm going to sort of continue this wedged cut across the surface of the board on the waste side of the cut. Okay. So that gives me a nice notch that the saw will be able to reference to, and it gives me a very nice edge that is going to look nice in my final workpiece. As in the second class saw cut, I bring my saw up to the work. I let the little wedge that I cut on the end do its job. I bring the back of the saw down to follow the line, although in this case I've already got a nice wedge drawn all the way across the board. And now I have a cut that is both accurate and leaves a very nice edge right at the show face where you need it. When I approach a new challenge in woodworking, as I hope you will now, I tend to think first, well, what would be the coarse step? And where do I go from there? And what's the last tool? What's my fine step that I'm going to use? Cuts can be made with a sequence of steps using either hand or power tools. Power tool work often seeks to go from the initial state of the wood to the final workpiece in just one step. That's done via very carefully setting up the tool, first and last pass, to make a very precise cut just where you want it with a nice smooth surface. Handwork uses different tools to go from coarse to medium to fine in a series of steps where each tool is doing what it was designed to do and making a cut of that coarseness that it was designed to cut. If you leave out a step, you're going to either do too much work or end up overshooting your goal. For example, if I had used the axe to try to achieve too fine a result, I might have gone over my line and taken out too much wood. But if I had used a spoke shave to try to cut the curve in the board that we did in the initial demo, then I would have been sitting there with the spoke shave all day just to try to get enough wood removed to cut that curve. Coarse tools are designed to remove a lot of wood quickly. Fine tools remove very thin shavings of wood. They go very slowly, but they also can leave a very fine surface. Fine tools allow you to sneak up on a fit because they only remove a little bit of wood at a time. So if you go one stroke too many, you've only gone one stroke too many, and if it's a really fine tool, that may only be a few thousandths of an inch. Power tools, if you're working with power tools in your shop, you're probably not working up too much of a sweat. With hand tools, especially when we're doing coarse work, we're putting out a lot of energy. So we really want to make sure that we do as much of the work in the coarse regime with a coarse tool so that we're not putting all of our energy into grinding the wood up into little bits of sawdust. We're actually making shavings at different sizes. Coarse methods often use weaknesses in the grain of the wood and exploit those weaknesses to do things like making splits so that we can remove a lot of wood all in one step with a minimum of energy. So to illustrate what we've done today and to conclude, we only need to look down at the shop floor. I see a lot of coarse chips, I see some finer chips, and I see some very fine shavings. Coarse, medium, fine has been a very useful concept for me in my shop. The next time you approach a woodworking challenge, start to think to yourself first, how can I approach this from the point of view of making these cuts using first a coarse step, a medium step, and a fine step. And if you do this, I guarantee that your work is going to be less, you're going to reduce the amount of work, and you're also going to improve your results.